KnockBack is sponsored by BetterHelp, and you can learn more about their brand of online therapy by going to betterhelp.com/knockback. Mental health is important, vital even. We talk about it on our shows all the time. Thing is, tending to one's mental health can be out of reach for many, whether due to a lack of access, pricing, and more. But we at Last Stand Media have long been advocates of BetterHelp because it's an affordable, effective, and outright simple way to speak to a therapist. BetterHelp offers a safe, convenient way to connect with a licensed professional therapist over the phone, or via video, or even over text. And here's what I love the most. BetterHelp even offers financial aid for those who need to speak to a therapist but just can't afford it. I think that's awesome. My friends, I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy sessions by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/knockback. That's BetterHelp.com/KNOCKBACK. Join more than 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health at betterhelp.com/knockback. KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan, the Kingslayer. Moriarty, Dagan, how are you? Ever since we thought we agreed that scene was funny, I just haven't been able to stop. I say it all the time.
That is a really funny scene because you think she would have stopped calling him that by then.
That's exactly right.
And she just keeps going.
It's like just one in one ear, not the other. He has this like heartfelt thing, and then he like faints, and immediately she calls him. She thinks Sir Jamie.
I feel like it was a mistake that they kept in. But anyway, we're regressing back to season 3. But it is funny. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, it's one of those things. Because it's not her character to do that. Yeah. You know what I mean? She's very honorable.
Right.
Very respectful.
This is funny to me. Anyway, Dig, before we get into our episode today, our retro and nostalgia podcast, how are you doing? What's going on?
Well, since we're talking about respect. This is what I was thinking about, because this will paint a picture for you guys about the level of respect that I command in this house. Casa de Moriarty. Okay, this happened just a couple of days ago, and I was just thinking because we were taking Lily to dance. This happened the other day when I was taking her to dance in the morning, and I think it must have been Saturday morning class, because she's always very tired. She's still waking up. She's not talkative. It's very low energy. So I usually just try to make conversation, or I bust her chops because she's an easy target and she's going to be extra cranky about it, which is actually kind of dangerous for me to do, but I like to live on the edge. So I thought about what am I going to say to her? Because she's not going to talk to me the entire 15-minute ride there, right? So then I have a brainstorm of something that I have been thinking about. And I was like, this would be kind of funny for me to talk about on the podcast too. And I had never confided this in anybody. And I have a friendship with Lil. She's the type of person I could kind of bounce things off of. So she's 15 now, So I say, yeah, I'm going to tell her. So now let me preface this by saying I literally haven't told anybody else this except for Lilia. But it's her reaction that I think is so hilarious and kind of not surprising, I guess. So I've been thinking about this. I guess really I've been thinking about this for quite some time, but it's only recently where I really started to wrap my head around, hey, you should actually entertain the thought of trying this out. So I tell her, I say, Lil, haven't told anybody else this. What do you think? Thinking about trying stand-up comedy. Okay. It didn't take a beat. I mean, in 2 frames, she was like, oh my God, please don't. Now, all of a sudden, she's alive.
Yeah.
She's all full of energy. This is the catalyst she needed. So, oh my God, please don't. And she's serious. She's not joking around. That is going to be so awkward. And I'm like, I immediately start laughing, and I immediately come back and respond, awkward for who? And she's like, for everybody. And then she says,
that's funny.
Yeah. Oh no, she's serious. Because she's automatically thinking of herself. I don't know how she drew herself up in this whole thing. She's not going to be in the crowd. Right. So she goes, it's going to be especially awkward for you. But it wasn't a concern thing. It was like, oh my God, Dad, please don't embarrass us. Don't embarrass me, the family name. Just don't put that out in the universe type thing. And I come to this because I've been thinking about it recently. I think it comes back to my walks and just having that time to think and just take a break from work, take away from the computer screen. And I realized I've been spending a lot of time while I work recently listening to Bill Burr, listening to his Monday morning podcast. I think he's great. I think he's very fun. He's actually very smart. He has a segment of his show that he does where he sort of helps viewers out with advice. He has his wife Nia on sometimes. I think the dynamic of their relationship is very fun. And I've also kind of delved back into a comedian in cars getting coffee thing with Jerry and his comic du jour, where they just kind of spin and talk about comedy and stand up and writing and the craft and maybe some people that they admire or their mentors or experiences they've had as young comics, heckling, all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of made it feel like, yeah, you know what? I always loved writing. I always had a keen interest in acting, which I never really pursued. And that's kind of the craft of, theatrical, getting on stage, a performance, a persona, a style, all that kind of stuff. So I've been really dabbling with the idea. It's nothing that I'm serious about, but she was the first one. You guys are the second ones where I kind of bounced that off. And that was the sincere reaction that I got, because my daughter, dad jokes aside and everything like that, which no one thinks is funny, she really could think I am probably the most unfunny person on the planet. So for her, I think it was shock. I think it was that 15-year-old sort of fear of like embarrassment, whatever it was.
Shock and
but I immediately when it happened, I was like, this is what I'm talking about next week, because it really is a case in point about my family and just the level of appreciation that I don't get.
Was an old Long Island comic that always said, I don't get no respect. So you're in the great.
That is very true.
You're in the great tradition.
Absolutely.
That his wife's always cheating on him, and like all this is funny shit. But no, it's funny, man, because it's so funny you brought that up, because I was thinking recently, it kind of dovetails nicely with this, which is just this idea of being embarrassed to do something, or being embarrassed or embarrassing other people, and how little I care anymore about anything. And now it's been a long time. We might have discussed it on the show in the past, but I just don't care anymore. And I haven't for years. But it gets worse and worse. I just have total dad energy. I just don't care, Like, it was raining, and the water, when it's torrential raining, the water kind of disturbs the terrain with the wood chips and everything. And so I'm like literally individually picking up the wood chips off my driveway and putting them back in the garden, and like just doing things that like I totally would have been embarrassed of. The difference though is that I don't have children like our dad did, for instance, and our dad used to do his yard work in Daisy Dukes. So that was especially embarrassing. And if you think I'm kidding, I'm not.
And don't forget the half shirt.
Yeah, he would wear a half shirt and like Daisy Dukes and have like
a village person.
It was insane. I don't know if dad was living out some sort of midlife homosexual fantasy or some stuff.
And work boots and sometimes a hat. I don't know, various hats. I'm not gonna exaggerate. This doesn't need hyperbole. Believe me. I wish we had pictures of this. Colin is not lying.
No, I'm not.
This is the getup.
It was almost so natural to me that I didn't even understand why it was funny when I was so young, because it was like, yeah, dad's wearing cut off jeans that are going straight up, and dad also used to wear a Speedo in the pool.
Yes, he did,
and to the beach.
Talk about being unapologetic and giving no shits.
No, our dad's jacked and 6'3", and
he was big back then. Yeah. No one who was good. That's what we always laugh about. Who was going to say anything? But like Daisy Dukes, legit Daisy Dukes with the pockets hanging at the bottom. Like they were short. Well, I'm not talking about jean shorts cut above the knee.
I don't know what.
Seeing some ass cheek from the back.
Dude, I don't know what he was thinking. Like, what was he thinking other than just saving money, I guess, or some weird shit, like some weird thing he had to do. Yeah, cutting had midriff showing. It was very weird. It was very erotic, and I feel like it's a little homoerotic. I got to be honest with you. That's fine. It's fine.
We got to kind of pursue that with Dad and kind of pick his brain. And where were you, Dad? What were you thinking with this ensemble of the daisies, the half shirt? Because the Daisy Dukes alone, maybe you're wearing a T-shirt. It's a little less egregious. but with your belly hanging out, then the work boots and some kind of socks, I'm assuming, and then some sort of headgear, maybe a bandana, a headband. It was...
Yeah, and you have like his belt on, like his work belt a lot and stuff, like just...
Yes, and the work belt hung lower than the jeans.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a statement. And you know what's funny about it is there are people in our lives that if you're close enough to us, you know exactly what we're talking about. Because like everyone's seen it. If like you're PJ or you're a friend, Mike Pope or someone, you know exactly what we're talking about when I say my dad would be weeding the garden in his Daisy Dukes.
So, yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't like a reserve outfit when he ran out of laundry. That was his yard outfit weekly. Dad, I know you're listening. Eventually he will listen to this episode.
Yeah, I'm going to see him in a couple days, actually. Maybe I'll remember
to
ask him about that.
Get a little insight into this.
Yeah. I need a little insight into that.
We need a picture of this.
I need a lot of insight into Dad. I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that whole puzzle.
You'll see him in a few days.
Yeah, I'll see him shortly. So
you could sort of peck away at it.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do.
See what you could do.
All right, my friend. Well, let's get into the topic at hand. It's Game of Thrones season 4, which first aired in, I think, 2014. And this is, for a lot of people, peak or around peak Game of Thrones. This is good stuff. 10 episodes. What I like about this season is that a lot happens, but I actually feel like the story slows down quite a bit. And because I take notes naturally, as I always say in my book, and I don't really skimp. Like when I have a lot to say, I'm writing notes, and like when a lot of things are happening, I'm trying to jot notes down. But for some reason, this season I just didn't write down as much as I usually did. In fact, the last episode we did by recording was episode 3, Star Wars episode 3, and I wrote 4 pages for that, and I only wrote 3 pages total for this entire season. So that's interesting to me. But in organizing everyone's letters on Patreon, I realized there really are like a half dozen beats that need to be touched upon. And that's it. I mean, in quotes, that's it. There's not a lot of like textural stuff. Big things happen, big characters, some characters die and some characters recombine and meet each other. And for instance, Stannis comes together with Jon Snow at the end. Like, what's that going to be like? And Tywin and Tyrion and all of that at the end. And there's just a lot. Jaime and not only Jaime and Cersei, but Jaime and Brienne and all the jealousy and all the rest. There's just a lot. God, Bronn with Tyrion and Arya with the Hound. And yeah, there's a lot. So I'm going to get into all that. And of course, to remind everyone, this is our retro and nostalgia podcast. We do it each and every week. Patreon.com/lastdaymedia. I won't waste any more of your time, though. I want to get into what Dagan has to say from a top level about the season. I'm curious, Dag, what comes to mind for you after watching this 10 episode run, and where do you want to begin?
Yeah, I already professed my sincere, deepest love for season 3. And I have to say, after getting through season 4 again, this time for the show, Kyle, it's kind of a toss up for me between season 3 and season 4. I like them for different reasons. Now, season 4 contains Oberyn Martell, which kind of tips the scales a little bit in season 4 favor, unfairly, maybe a little bit. It's also the only season we get Oberyn, Prince Oberyn, but
who's going to also, by the way, he's playing Joel in The Last of Us on HBO, so he'll be back.
Oh, you know what? I don't think I even knew that. I was thinking about Pedro Pascal a lot because of The Mandalorian.
Right. And he's in Narcos, I think, too. So he's a pretty big star, actually.
Huge. And he's so good, dude.
And I was reading just a little bit about him, too. It's funny. It's auspicious kind of beginnings. I mean, before this, but he's like really... We were talking about Stannis and how that guy doesn't really know what's going on, and I always think that's funny when I see him on screen. Like, I just always laugh about that. I always imagine Sir Davos's actor telling him what's going on before they get on there. But he's apparently the exact opposite. Like, he apparently like rants and raves about doing the show and is like super honored to have been part of it. I love
that.
Which is cool.
I love that about him. Like, yeah, he really embraces the nerd culture, and he's kind of become this nerd culture icon through these parts. I also heard a great thing about him too, that wherever he was coming off of before he got cast in Game of Thrones, the people from that production, I believe it was a feature film, called the showrunners at Games and was like, you don't understand. This guy is the best. You guys are so lucky. He's wonderful. And he really is amazing. And I love the character. I can't wait to go into him. But you know what? It's true what you say too, Kyle. I'm finding it so hard. Game of Thrones is really easy to talk about because we're so enthusiastic about it and it's so wonderful. And there's so much to say. but I find it probably harder than any other topic that we've talked about maybe in the entirety of our show so far, just because it is so much. I think it's largely due to the sheer amount of characters. Even something that's really rich, like, and that we've talked about a little bit, like The Sopranos, which tends to have a lot of characters, or another episodic series that has a lot of players. This has a lot. I mean, there's so many. It's almost a testament to the show that you could remember all of them and that you could remember who plays them and what they do from season to season. So that's really, I think that really does say a lot about the show and how wonderful it is. And you know what? It's true. I think, one thing that's important to realize with season 4, by the time we're halfway through the 8-season run of the show. So we're at the halfway point. And I really think this is pinnacle, peak Game of Thrones. A lot of people would say it goes downhill starting with season 5. I like all the seasons through 7, to be honest. And we'll get to 8 eventually. But it's nice to still be in the prime of Game of Thrones. And there's going to be a lot to say this season. And I always just think of it with the characters. I think you're right, though. There's something about the pace that seems to slow from season 3, although there's a lot of exciting and dramatic things that happen. I think main characters like Tyrion, they're mostly in one place, which makes it a little more manageable for the discussion and makes the pace feel a little more languid. But I think, there's just so much to say. It's almost impossible to know where to start and stop. So at the beginning of the show, I'm always wondering, I'm always hoping that we're going to do it justice. So hold our feet to the fire, my friends.
Indeed. Well, we can start with Oberyn. I mean, he's a main character this season, comes and goes. Dornish Prince. I actually like his introductory scene when he's riding in and Tyrion's there with Pod and whatever. They just kind of like go past him or whatever. There's obviously a lot of notable things about him. His complete sexuality, his bisexuality, his open marriage, and all of the rest. Obviously, his traumatic death at the end. What's cool here is, first of all, there's the constant foreshadowing of his conflict with the Mountain. I wish I remembered what it was like to learn about that he was going to become the champion, because you're kind of wondering and you're kind of assuming it's going to be Jaime. Then after Jaime admits that he couldn't fight the Mountain, you, at least with my opinion at the time, as I recall, was thinking that Tywin was clearly going to live, because I knew he was still around at the time, like in the late seasons, but that he was going to get away somehow. And then you realize that this other guy steps in, which is pretty cool. But there's so much backstory, because I don't really feel like we see or learn about who he really is in the show. I'm sure, or I would imagine that in the books it's much more clear, but you kind of just get a little bit of a texture from him. And they kind of set it up, I think, in the season before when they send Myrcella over there to marry off to one of their people in Dorne. But the way that Oberyn talks about Dorne, it makes it seem like it's a much more progressive and normal society. Although there's that awesome Cersei quote where she's like, everywhere they hurt little girls, or something like that, when he was trying to protect them.
So good.
So there is a lot to say about him. I'm curious what strikes you about him before we get into the whole culmination, of course, with the fight and his death and being Tywin or Tyrion's champion. What did you make about Prince Oberyn? What's so intriguing about him to you?
Yeah, he feels so exotic for the show. I think his introduction is wonderful with Tyrion and Bronn and their sort of entourage waiting for the hosts from Dorne to come in and visit, and they're coming for Joffrey's wedding, and the king can't come. So Oberyn comes in his stead, who is a second son. He's a prince. And I think I love the fact that they build him up as this legendary warrior, but he is also a prince. Again, he's a second son. And I love that. Seems so fitting if you think about it for a second born noble. You're not going to rule. So I love the fact of like, I'm going to pursue this life of being a warrior, but you still have that nobility. It's super cool. And I love the way they build him up before he's even on screen. Tyrion's like, oh shit, he's here already. We have to find him because he's going to kill somebody, type of thing. Because he has a notorious hatred for the Lannisters. Right. That was just beautiful character building before we even see Pedro Pascal on screen. So fun. And then, yeah, he's just this really interesting character. I heard that they kind of dressed him like 1970s era, like Jimmy Page. And We already know Dorne to be this very, I don't know, I always think about it like a very Spain-like, Greece-like, maybe kind of interwoven with
like Mediterranean.
Eastern. Yeah, Mediterranean. Really, really exotic,
I'm looking
Southern.
up a map right now. Yeah.
Like you were saying, fashion forward. They always say the good wine comes from there. And this house, the Martells, they're kind of like this renowned house of these warriors, and they're, these red vipers. And he seems like he's handsome. He's obviously very sexual. He's very sexually fluid with men and women, and we see all that. And I think we like him automatically because we know the Lannisters to be a pretty evil lot, and he hates them. So automatically he has appeal because we're like on his side. And he's got a serious bone to pick, and a legitimate bone to pick, because the Mountain killed his sister and his niece and nephew, and he wants revenge. And that's why he's there. And it's a convenient thing to be there for the wedding. But you learn more about him as he has exchanges with various characters, as he has conversations with Tyrion and Bronn, with Varys, with Cersei, with Tywin later on. And you get, every time he has a conversation, you get to know a little more about him. And he's this stranger in a strange land, but he's also fearless. And that just makes him so interesting. I mean, he's taking out knights, Lannister knights, 2 at a time in the brothel, and he has a dagger, and they have these huge broadswords. You're like, who? He just reminds me of a scorpion, And his death, not to put the cart ahead of the horse, but his death gutted me. I mean, that was as shocking a moment. That was the red wedding moment of season 4 for me, because you have this forward momentum of this character that wants revenge, and it's righteous. And he's pretty close to killing this guy. And he just flew too close to the sun. He fought with anger. If he just calmed the hell down, he would have gotten his victory. And it says so much. It's a really stark reminder of what this show does, which it doesn't banter about trying to be too precious or too emotional, or too, it doesn't really get sentimental. Things are going to happen, and there's a realism to that that's really jarring. And Oberyn's death was just, I mean, no pun intended, I was crushed when he died. Not only when he died, but how he died. He dies horribly. Like, it's one of the most horrible deaths in the entire show.
What I like about, let's talk about it. Quinn Zelenko wrote in and said, straight up, is Oberyn's death the most gruesome death in TV or movie history? It sticks with me to this day. Love these season by season breakdowns. Thank you.
Thank you.
The thing about this, and I remarked to Micah what I loved about it, was, first of all, I knew it was happening because I've seen this before. Now we're getting into the territory I've seen everything once. So I knew this was going to happen, and I remember being like, it is one of those red weddings, sit at the edge of your seat being like, holy shit, when that happens. And what I was saying, that I liked about it, is that there might be like 5-6 seconds in real time between him celebrating and him being dead.
Yes.
And
yeah,
it happens like that. And I love that shit. And the celebrating and all of that, and the different fighting styles were cool too. But you realize the Mountain's not necessarily very talented. Now they really, the Mountain is changes a lot, and I love how they bring in the fallen Maester and all that. It's fucking dope. They don't really execute it very well, maybe, but it's dope that they have this thing where this academic who's totally outside, doesn't have his chains and all this, revives him, and they get to that, but later, especially next season. Yeah. But I do like how it just changes like that. Like, he thinks he won, and he's screaming in death, but it's all within seconds, and it's over. And you're right, he could have just ended it so many different times, but he was insistent on this, making him say these things. And what's fucked up is that the Mountain then says, like, yes, he's killing him, like, yes, I raped and killed your sister and killed her kids and all this. It's like, damn, dude, like, you just ate it. In all, for all time. That was a fuck up. And it's that thing where the Mountain just sweeps his legs out, was like, with his arm.
That's when it shifted. It turned on a dime. That was it. That moment, that victory, that sure-footed victory, just turns to the most horrific. He gets all his teeth knocked out, and then
that shot is horrible. Yeah.
Dude. And then like you said, he gets swept, gets his teeth knocked out, gets his head crushed like a pumpkin, And his paramour is watching the entire thing. She just screams in horror. It's the most heart-wrenching thing, because what you said, you have that momentum in one direction and your blood is boiling with Oberon's. You're like, oh, we got this. And then just like Colin said, in seconds, you're completely, utterly defeated. And we're defeated because we were right there with them.
Yeah,
and, it's really important to say this will set off a chain of events for future seasons between the Lannisters and the Martells, between Dorne and King's Landing. So this is a very important thing to have happen. It's a shame to lose Oberyn because I think he is so different. He really stands out like all the good characters. He provides something completely original compared to everybody else. But, it was nice while we knew him.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, him stabbing the guy, like you said, through the hand and all of this is a really hot start and a really tragic and violent end. Just absolutely crushes him. I didn't remember the whole that there's poison on his spear kind of thing, which Micah had pointed out. I actually didn't, and now that becomes clear when the mountain is being worked on by the fallen maester or whatever. But the reality is that I just didn't remember that whole thing at all. And one of the cool scenes, I like how you kind of can read into the rules, right? Like there's this rule of trial by combat. And I like how he breaks his spear and then the guy throws him another spear. And now everyone's like, that's totally like no one said anything or thought booed or pissed or anything. Like there's some sort of rule set, which is interesting. We're not really privy to, which is fun and fascinating. And it is, he played the mountain exactly the way he should, which is to continue to move and stick and move. And he just couldn't finish the job. Very sad for that character to come, but shines so bright. Like we said, a lot of the characters that don't stick around for very long, as strong as the main characters are, for the guys that don't stick around very long, incredibly powerful performances from a lot of them. And so this is no exception to that. Let's work backwards though, and I want to talk about the trial itself. Mike Poe wrote in and said, "Good day, brothers Moriarty. There are so many exceptional scenes in the season between the fight with the Mountain, Joffrey's death, and the Battle of the Wall. However, the one that sticks with me the most is Tyrion's trial, where Tyrion delivers the most cathartic speech I had ever seen. I don't think any writer could do better than watching you vicious bastards die gives me more relief than 1,000 lying whores. If Tyrion hadn't been set free, do you think Tywin would have actually allowed the execution to happen? Or do you think he would have been true to his word at the end and covertly saved him?" The trial is so interesting because, and I'm curious, what do you make of this this incredible drive to just kill Tyrion? And it makes you wonder, like, why don't you just do it? Not to be so dark, but these people are so evil and corrupt. It's like, just kill him. You could have killed him so many times when he was a kid, when he was an infant. Obviously, he talks about how he was going to drop him in the water and let him drown and didn't, and all of this crazy shit. And you start to feel worse and worse for Tyrion as you just learn about all of the abuse he's been put through. In fact, it's Oberyn telling him the story about how he met him when he was very young, and that there were all of these rumors about how ghastly and demonish he was, but when he saw him, it was just a baby with a big head. And that, Cersei like squeezed his dick and weird shit like that. Like I like that the show is demented, but doesn't shy away from this really harsh sexual undertone and all these weird things with them. But KnockBack is sponsored by BetterHelp, and you can learn more about their brand of online therapy by going to betterhelp.com/knockback. Mental health is important, vital even. We talk about it on our shows all the time. Thing is, tending to one's mental health can be out of reach for many, whether due to a lack of access, pricing, and more. But we at Last Stand Media have long been advocates of BetterHelp because it's an affordable, effective, and outright simple way to speak to a therapist. When I first went to therapy as a kid in the early 90s, I had to drive somewhere with my dad, sit in a waiting room, talk to someone in person, and so on. That's totally fine, and that works, obviously, but we're not in 1992 anymore. It's 2022, and so, like with everything else in our lives, how we interact with therapy has changed. BetterHelp offers a safe, convenient way to connect with a licensed professional therapist over the phone, or via video, or even over text. Anyone in the world can use BetterHelp, and it's more affordable than offline counseling. And here's what I love the most. BetterHelp even offers financial aid for those who need to speak to a therapist but just can't afford it. I think that's awesome. I believe in the efficacy of therapy. It's worked for me in my own life, and I know it can work for you too. Whether you're dealing with depression and anxiety like I've been battling most of my life, or you're having problems at work or in a relationship and so much more, anything else you can think of really, there's someone at BetterHelp waiting to speak with you. BetterHelp is professional and confidential, and you have nothing to lose and a whole lot to gain by giving it a go. My friends, I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy sessions by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/knockback. That's BETTERHELP.com/KNOCKBACK. Join more than 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health at betterhelp.com/knockback. Take good care of yourselves with online therapy at BetterHelp. I'm curious, because I know you're very passionate about Tyrion as a character. What did you think about his trial and his arrest and the way he's treated, his relationship, of course, with Jaime, his conversations with Tywin? There's a lot of different things that we can touch on here, but I'm curious what strikes you.
Yeah, I mean, really, again, shout out to Peter Dinklage. I know he won a couple of Emmys for the show at least, right? I'm not sure about this season specifically, but God, so good. The trial, I mean, really, when you start the season off, you quickly know before Joffrey dies in episode 2. So you have a bunch of very early in the season. And I had to kind of channel back of watching it for the first time. And there's a little bit of course, like curiosity, because you really don't know who poisoned Joffrey right away. And then I realized there are a lot more clues than I initially even remembered. But you're even thinking, holy shit, did Tyrion or, slash Sansa have some hand in this? Now, you could see with the early episodes, Joffrey and Tyrion are coming to extreme loggerheads. I mean, Joffrey's going to make it impossible, literally impossible for Tyrion to just carry on in King's Landing. That is a relationship that is just not going to work, and Joffrey's going to be extra sure of that. And his death, of course, the majority of this season kind of springs Tyrion into being imprisoned and then, of course, being on trial. And, you're really, it was pretty early on, or at least you could intimate that it wasn't him and that he's the victim here. And I love what you said, Kyle, about King's Landing and sort of the pageantry. Everything with the Lannisters is pageantry and a shroud and a charade. And Tyrion's monologue, when he even after Jaime cuts a deal for him and was like, just cool down. You're going to survive. I made a deal with Dad. You're going to be sent to the wall. You could live out your life at the Night's Watch. Tyrion just can't let it go. And in that monologue, it's cathartic for us because he's finally breaking down those walls and that pageantry and just saying, look, you people are fucking vile. I saved all of you. I'm glad Joffrey's dead. He's a vicious bastard and all of this. It's unbelievable. And the acting and just saying to them, like, I'm not, again, that whole thing of I'm not the monster that you think I am, but I might as well be because of the way I'm treated. And you're really just wondering how it's going to go for Tyrion, because not only that, but we find out that Jaime is not going to be able to defend him. The training with Bronn's not going well. Can't fight with his left hand. Which is a big arc for Jaime in this season. And Bronn says, I'm not going to do it. I'm your friend. I love you, but I'm not going to risk my life for you. I have all of these things now. I'm a lord. I have a castle. I'm about to be married. I have these riches, which is really heartbreaking. So it's like, so again, that rah-rah moment of like, Oberyn's going to fight for Tyrion and he's going to get his revenge and he's going to save Tyrion's reputation and he's going to help Tyrion survive this and all this stuff. But you're right. It's this vile thing of just wanting to find excuses to kill poor Tyrion. And obviously we find out soon enough that it was some sort of Tyrell / Littlefinger plot to kill Joff, and Tyrion had nothing to do with it. And he literally spends the season in that cell until the very end.
Yeah,
which is wow.
As far as Bronn is concerned, it's interesting. I like that scene with Bronn because at some point you're kind of like, well, what? It's kind of unrealistic to expect him to do this. Why would he do this? He's done a lot, and
oh my god,
you can't really get mad at him. When they were in what was it, the Eyrie, and he fought. He didn't know him, and he won. I mean, there's a reason Tyrion's alive. Like, he shouldn't be expected to do that again.
Sure.
And so it's hard to get. It's interesting to see him in his nice outfit and all of this, and talking about this, that, and the other thing. But I felt that in the moment. It's like, well, this guy doesn't really owe you anything. In fact, he tried to train your brother to fight. And I love, by the way, that seaside little getup they got there, that Mediterranean looking, I don't know, facade that they train at. It's so cool. I don't know if they made that for the show or that's some ancient.
No, that's supposedly
Roman
some
thing.
rich. I don't know where they filmed that, but I heard that was some rich like billionaire's backyard.
Oh,
and
cool.
they filmed it on his patio. They just doctored up his patio with like fake rocks and stuff on the seaside, and they filmed it there.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, it's a very cool thing, and they need the privacy. They don't want to out Jamie as being maybe incompetent. One of the things that struck me as far as the trial is concerned too is just the deception of Shay, which I didn't remember. I didn't remember that happening at all, and how dark it is that he ends up killing her. I mean, it really goes to show you, because you think Shay, and I don't know if the book goes into it more, but you kind of look at Shay as this tragic figure. But is she? I mean, we don't really know how the depths of her love for Tyrion in hindsight didn't seem much deeper than, I don't know, puppy love and money and convenience. And he finds her in bed saying the same things to him that she used to say to him when she was sleeping with him. So I found that really hard to witness. I don't know if the book goes into more of like, was she captured and compelled, or was she, I don't know. I don't even know what the vibe is that I get from that. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it is. There's so much fodder in watching this to read the books. I've been thinking about it a lot. In fact, I was thinking about it last night. Do I just push like pull the trigger and buy these things already? I really do want to read them because I want more. And, I want more texture. I want more background and depth. But, the way I saw it was that Shay probably really did love Tyrion, and she's making him pay for his slight. He wants to build early on, before the murder of Joff, before the trial. He's really just legit trying to build a normal life in King's Landing. And it feels like he wants to do right by his new wife. He wants to do right by Sansa. And he also, in the same breath, knows that Shay's in danger for being a prostitute and for just straight up being associated with him. So he knows he needs to send Shay away, not only for him, but for her. So I think he does love Shay too, but I think it was that thing of like, if you love them, let them go type of deal. But Shay doesn't take the slight well. And I think it's her. I think the way she appears in the trial and what she says is revenge. I think it's really revenge on Tyrion. And it really makes you feel for him at that moment, because her what she says is compelling. And they're going to listen to anything that's said that's anti-Tyrion. And, Tyrion even says in that moment, like, Shay, don't. Like, she's obviously, he knows she's sort of fabricating the entire thing, the plot with him and Sansa, that they planned this thing, they planned Joffrey's murder, all of this. And it's kind of another nail in the coffin for Tyrion, maybe the biggest nail. When that happens, it's shocking. And then, of course, leading up to, sort of has that moment at the end where Jaime and Varys put the wheels in motion to set him free, and that he's going to be whisked out of King's Landing and away from danger. And he takes that crossbow off the wall and he's going for Tyrion. And he's very emotional in that moment. He, again, feels like it's like his monologue. He can't let it go. It's been years of abuse and torture.
Yeah, who can blame him?
What he finds is 10 times worse than what he thought he was going to find in Tywin's bedroom. And it's so emotional. Like, even while he's strangling her and apologizing at the same time, it's like, it's weird. There's very few times I've witnessed a character murder another character where you're really feeling for the murderer, but you are, because he's kind of thrust into this situation. And then that whole exchange with Tywin at the end, where Tywin is still sitting on that chamber pot with a crossbow pointed right at his forehead, and he's still negotiating. He's still Tywin in that moment. And he's so, he's got that silver tongue. He's like, did you think I was really going to do this? Of course I wasn't. Come on, back to my, it's like, wow. You almost even think Tyrion might buy it for a second.
Right. Yeah, I definitely didn't expect him to kill him. And it's such a great cliffhanger. In fact, Joe B wrote in and said, Hey, Moriarty Bros. To this day,
Yo.
season 4 is my favorite of the entire show.
Hmm.
Everything from Joffrey meeting his end to the mountain squishing Oberyn's head like a grape. Though I think the final 15 minutes of episode 10 are some of the strongest of maybe the entire series. Tyrion finally destroying his ties to being a Lannister sets him off on an entirely different arc for the remainder of the series and causes a real power shift with Tywin out of the picture. Do you both find his acting in the scene to be as top-notch as I do? The "you're no son of mine and I am your son, I've always been your son" line still gives me chills these many years later. Thank you for writing in, Joe. You're no son, you're no son of mine. The ticking in the beginning, like the dot, 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 you know,
I
like,
don't even think of that song.
That song is so good. I fucking love that song. You told me. Wrong song. Okay.
Oh, all right.
Dig. I'm curious from this particular question from Joe. He asked about the acting, and you had brought up Tywin and his kind of going back, like, come back to my chamber, let's figure this out. What I couldn't help but notice or not notice, but kind of feel and wonder was like if there must have been like rigid fear underneath that. Like, in other words, did he really? I wonder what he was going on in his head as the character. Was he scared? I mean, it's obviously like someone's pointing a crossbow bolt at your fucking chest when you're taking a dump in the middle of the night. That's scary, but he is manipulative and he knows his son. And that's what I think was interesting was I wonder if he was really scared or if the so-called bending of expectations here, the usurpation of those expectations served the story because we don't expect Tyrion to kill Tywin. What do you make of that? Do you think he was truly scared in that moment, or do you think he was going to get out of that?
I really think Tywin thought that he could get out of it. You know, I think he's used to negotiating. He's extremely intelligent. He's used to getting his way. I think only after he gets that first crossbow bolt shot in him that he realizes it's over. Because he changes his tune and starts abusing Tyrion again after that, oddly enough. Instead of clinging to philosophy of please have mercy, he goes kind of the other direction and kind of admonishes Tyrion again until Tyrion fires that second shot into him. Another thing about Tywin, Kyle, that I realized in this season, I mean, talk about a boss, right? He sits on the Iron Throne, especially during the trial, like he owns that thing. He's not a king. He sits on the Iron Throne like he's expected to be there. And I realized that at some point in watching this again for the third time, season 4, and being like, wow, he sits on the Iron Throne like that's his place. And he really is the king, right? Everybody else, Joffrey, Tommen later on, whoever,
certainly
was a figurehead. Once Robert died, it really was Tywin. And he certainly acts like it. So it was a really satisfying death for me because not only did he die in really questionable circumstances on a chamber pot and all that kind of thing, and he's such an evil bastard, Tywin, but to die at the hands of Tyrion was one of those moments, unlike the Oberyn thing, where it's like, wow, you're something that's a result that's satisfying.
Yeah, very rare
in this
story.
Show.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like giving you anything that you want to happen. Like, even we'll talk about the Hound, but even the Hound dying, it's like, oh, you don't. God, like, why? You know, like, what? This is, or at the end anyway.
Yeah. Being left for dead.
Right. I should say that. We had brought up Sansa and her relationship to all of this. I want to get into a little bit of that, but to do that, we need to talk about Joffrey's death. And Kaz and Risk wrote in and said, hey, Moriarty Bros. I just want to say that Joffrey's death was, throughout the entire series, probably the most shocking death, in my opinion. Usually that big moment is reserved for a finale or penultimate episode, but to happen during the second episode and at his wedding was such a twist. Told me this season is going to be big with such a moment kicking everything off. It's funny because I was saying last episode we did about this, that there was a moment, and I didn't want to spoil it for anyone that was going along with us, that I thought happened in season 3, and this was it. Where for some reason I thought that happened in season 3, but it happens in season 4. It is a huge surprise, and I think what makes it so satisfying as well is, and this is maybe the second satisfying thing that happens this season, is just how much of a peak dickhead he's being at the festivities.
My God.
To the point where it's like inevitable. It just seems like it's like how can a person be so evil and so bad? He even names his sword the Valyrian steel sword, Widow's Wail, which is a great name, but such an evil and
so sinister
name. This is another example very similar to Ned Stark's death in season 1 and others as well, where it's like no one is safe in this story and anything can happen at any time. And that's the one bummer about watching it again, is that all of that is removed, because even though you don't remember any of the texture, and at least I don't remember so many things that happen. It's like, the big things that are eventually going to happen. And I certainly know that when I was watching this through, I did not know that happened. So what did you think about that, the day, the party and the death and the reaction to it and all the rest?
So shocking, because by now into season 4, you know enough about King of Thrones and the way it goes and sort of the beats and the rhythms that you don't even dare to hope that Joffrey's going to be killed, right? You're like, that's not going to happen. They're not going to do that. Why would they reward us with something like that? It's just not the way. The bad guys don't tend to die in this show, at least right away. They definitely leave you on tenterhooks. And so his death, especially so early in the season, was really masterful done. And, shout out to Jack Gleason, too, because we talk about, of course, Peter Dinklage. We talk about Nikolai Coster-Waldau. We talk about all the amazing players in this. But Jack Gleason is so good. He's so good at being a bastard. He's so hateable. And you're right. He is the very definition of relentless at that wedding, at that reception, the way he's torturing Tyrion. He does not let up for 1 second. It's only Marjorie that actually adds a little bit of relief and tries to call him away and tries to cool things down. With the exception of that character trying to at least do that, you're like, how is this going to end up? He does not let Tyrion, he doesn't let up on Tyrion for 1 second. And that leads up right to Tyrion's death. And then the other thing we were talking about, you were saying with Sansa, when we find out Joffrey sort of orchestrated this pageant, this show with the little people. They were acting out the Battle of the Five Kings. It's like, how much more torture can one person possibly absorb? You know what I mean? Like the way he's mistreating this poor girl and the public embarrassment aspect of it with a wedding reception with hundreds of people. And the way everybody is just laughing and at best not saying anything or just quiet. The King's Landing is just full of vile people, right? And this is another aspect of it where it just plays up that angle that Joffrey was just he is just the most out and out evil son of a bitch right until his death. And then you're automatically thinking they do something very clever with the reception, because you got Oberyn there. He talks about with Tywin about studying poisons at the Citadel, and he's, in Essos, and that you have him, you have other people that don't like Joff there. You have, of course, his long-standing feud with Tyrion. So you're really wondering that, the Tyrells are a little, Olenna Tyrell's got some tricks up her sleeve. So you're like, really, what? Littlefinger, Varys. So you're like, what? There's really a really kind of a whodunit at the center of it, at least at first, where you're like, wow, this could go in a million different directions, including at first, was it Tyrion and Sansa? Ser Dantos the drunk whisks Sansa away to the boat, and then you realize it's kind of a plot with Littlefinger, and then later on, Olenna sort of confesses to Marjorie in not so many words that, it wasn't, I know for a fact that it wasn't Tyrion, which is amazing because I remember, not to spoil future seasons, but I remember Olenna's confession later on in a future season. I believe it's season 7. It's a wonderful moment between her and another character, which I won't spoil. But she does tip her hand in this season, if you're paying attention. She basically says she did it.
Yeah, she's like,
and I don't remember.
Do you think I would have let you marry that boy or something? Yeah,
exactly. So it's really interesting the way it plays out with the multitude of characters and who done it and who it could have been. And also the retribution. I mean, Cersei screaming at that wedding reception after her son dies in her arms is some of the most chilling, that take him, take. It's like, whoa, holy shit. Like you really feel that emotion, the anger, the animosity, everything, all that poison at the center of the Lannisters, and everything's going on in that family dynamic. Man, it just it's all brought to bear in this season. And it really does make for a wonderful viewing experience. Maybe the most emotional of all the seasons, I would say, season 4, because of that.
Certainly, at least so far. I can't speak to the others, but I think you're probably right. There's 2 things that I wanted to touch on in regards to Joffrey's Death. The first is just, and you had said Sir Dantos. I love the thick, multi-layered irony behind how Joffrey dies, because it's that he tortured the fuck out of this random dude at another party. He was gonna kill him. Sansa comes in and saves him, and then it ends up coming back and biting him in the ass. Now Sansa's kind of responsible for that, but it's just, I like that full story, quiet revenge kind of situation. Who knows how he was involved? They don't really get into it. So I enjoy that. And the other thing I enjoy about it is just, and I guess this is, well, I don't want to say I enjoy about it. It's actually something I question about it, which is, I don't understand, and maybe this is a little bit of the clumsiness with the story, or maybe it's just clumsiness with the TV version as opposed to the books, which we haven't read, but I just don't understand how anyone could abide someone this evil in power. It just seems comically evil. For example, Adolf Hitler, right, or Joseph Stalin, some of the worst mass murdering leaders in the world. I don't think that when they were, like, when Hitler would go speak to his parliament, his like rump parliament or whatever, that he would like take someone on stage and like chop a Jew's head off, in front of everyone and be like, look at this, like, it's just, it seems, you know what I mean? It's like, it's the evil was there. We all knew it's there. They know it's there, but it wasn't a performative evil that I think would have set people off. And that's, I think, part of keeping power. And so I don't understand the political reality that allows a tyrant like this to rule for so long, especially in a situation where kings are dying pretty rapidly. I mean, you have 2 kings ago is killed. Then the second king is kind of drunk and dies in a boar hunt. And now this king's dead. And they're talking about, all the Game of Thrones. I mean, everyone's been fighting over this thing forever. And when Tommen becomes king, it's noted that like he might be the first truly good king like that they've had in a really long time. So what do you think about that? Do you think that that's like a plot hole? Because to me, it's fun because it's so comical and it's villainousness, but at the same time, it just doesn't jive with the deep realism that the rest of the show portrays, in which there's a very complicated web of palace intrigue and political balance and money's paid and who's with who, and then you just have this crazy person at the top. It just doesn't really I don't know, it just doesn't. You would think someone would be like, this guy's done, and I don't know if it's only because he's a Lannister, which I think it might be, that he's untouchable because the money flows through that family, not through the individual. So it would have required one of the Lannisters themselves to have killed him. But I don't know. To me, I just feel like it's almost unbelievable. Like, was there ever a tyrant that, I mean, I'm sure there was, but it just, does this make sense to you? I'm just kind of rambling.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. I think I listened to a podcast talking about this very thing, and they were comparing Joffrey to like Richard the Longshanks or something. Real kings that were supposedly vile people, tyrants, and that some of them had long rules. I know what you're saying, though. It doesn't seem like somebody with that kind of personality and that sort of just out of control evil, that model would be tenable, especially because the Lannisters are one of the most important, most powerful, most wealthy kingdoms. They sort of rule Westeros. So the person being at the center of that, but I think you kind of said it already, Kyle. I think the person at the center of it really is Tywin. And the entire goal is for the Lannisters to rule, and the personalities are secondary. As long as the Lannisters are sitting on the Iron Throne, it doesn't really matter what Joffrey's doing because Tywin is there to check him. And I think a good reminder of that is when Joff does die and Tommen the Good sort of inherits the throne. Tommen the maybe naive, I don't know about Tommen the Good, but he is refreshingly good compared to his the others. But Tywin sort of reminds him that, as he's coaching him, that he basically says in not so many words, you're going to listen to me. It's about wisdom, and it's about listening to your advisors. I'm your advisor, and you're going to listen to me. And that is really the sort of infrastructure that the Lannisters have in place, with Tywin at the head of that totem pole, or at the foundation of their house, whatever you want to call it. I think that's the only reason Joffrey could get away with this craziness, because when Joffrey flies off the handle, for instance, at that little dinner rehearsal thing before the reception where they're giving him his gifts and Tyrion bestows upon him that huge book. And then he takes his Valyrian steel sword and just chops it to pieces. He says, thank you. Tyrion's even looking at him like, oh, wow, he's being gracious once. This is suspicious. And then in 2 frames, he's already chopping the book up with the sword, right? And I'm always watching Tywin in, off to the side in scenes like that to see how he reacts. And he reacts with a sort of nobility of Cersei does the same thing of this isn't really happening. We're kind of just ignoring this, or this is, you know what I mean? Like, this is just normal. This is the way it is. They have this kind of regal stature that where they don't show their emotions about, they're not going to admonish Joffrey, certainly in front of everybody and that kind of thing. It's about being stately and being a family and being like, this is who we are type of thing, and defending each other or whatever, no matter what. And I think not only that, Kyle, but you know what I noticed in this season too? Everybody off camera or off to the side, maybe in the background in a rack focus or something. Everybody's in character, even when they're not the subject of the shot. Everybody, for every scene, it's amazing. Like, their personality is in that scene, how they would really react, how you think that character would really react. They're reacting. I never caught a thing where it's awkward or Brienne's doing something weird or Lady Olenna or, you know what I mean? Like, everybody's in their role. Everybody's just in it. And that was one thing I checked with Tywin with that, especially with Joffrey, because you want to see how they're reacting to their king's really bad behavior.
Yeah,
and they do. They react like it's not happening. Like they're not going to acknowledge how bad it is.
You're totally right. It's just, again, it's so... I find it so interesting. They really could have done something about this. The people in power really could have done something about this. I mean, there are other... Tom and Art already always existed. It's not like it was unheard of in real history for people to be passed over or...
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not saying killed, but I mean, regicide. I'm not saying it's necessarily the right thing to do, but I don't know. That's one thing that just bothered me, because everything seems to be so well conducted and thoughtful. And I understand the comic evil. I get it. He's like fucking Cobra Commander. I get it. Like, but I don't know that it plays, because like I was saying, even chaotic evil people in real life didn't act like that. Like,
yeah,
at least in more modernity. And maybe that's part of why I'm looking at it through the wrong lens, because it's both fiction and not modern by our modern sense. But when you think about Joseph Stalin talking to the Politburo, he wasn't like dragging out fucking prisoners and killing them in front of them or something like that, or like cutting their tongues out. He was doing it behind closed doors. He was sending them to Siberia, or exiling them, or assassinating them, or poisoning them somewhere else. That's the thing that just I wanted.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great point. Especially because you have this. It seems like it's a little bit of like Veruca Salt with a murderous army at her back. Like Veruca Salt with homicidal tendencies. Like, it's not just impetuous. It's not just brattiness. It's that you're going to get murdered if you run afoul of this person. And you may not even run afoul. It might be perceived that you run afoul. That's all it's going to take. And to the probably detriment of your entire kingdom. It's completely self-indulgent. It's just really like him acting badly, and that's of paramount importance for Joffrey.
For sure. Yeah, it's very well put. Yeah, he's like a Batman villain in some way. And I don't necessarily mean it as an insult. It's just, it is what it is. All right, let's move over to Sansa, Baelish, all the stuff that's going on with them in the Vale. So Sansa escapes, as we noted, thanks to Ser Dantos, who she helped kindly in a previous season. He gave her jewelry, part of this fake house that he was part of, maybe never part of. I don't know, House Hollard. And one of the vials, or one of the jewels in that glass jewelry that Baelish later reveals that he had made, was a vial of poison that was then used to kill the king. The king. So I wanted to ask you about all this, because Baelish is acting obviously he's acting for himself first, and then he's also acting on behalf of the Starks in some weird way, because he was in love with this woman, and so he goes to the Vale, kind of plays up his love for the Lady of the Vale and her weird ass son and all of this kind of shit. And I really like how they kind of continue to thread this needle where, like, is Baelish bad? Is he not bad? Like, what? He's powerful. He's certainly not neutral in his outlook, but I like how they kind of continue to play with that, because I especially love that scene near the end of the season when he kills Aunt Liza, and then, although she's like kind of going off the deep end anyway, but then there's that scene where Sansa makes it seem like she's going to tell on him, and she even says, like, I'm sorry to say this, but then reveals her true identity instead, and really just plays them. And finally Sansa kind of is on the initiative for once, which is kind of interesting. She's just so abused. I don't necessarily like that character so much, but she's just so downtrodden and abused. It's like, holy moly, man. Like, give this girl a break. God. So what do you make about that whole arc in the Vale? Kind of trying to get them involved, and Baelish and helping her escape, and all the rest.
Yeah, I love that there's this plot for, it starts with Joffrey's murder. I love this plot that goes on that's completely off camera, that we don't know anything about, that you would ascertain that Olenna has something to do with it, maybe some of the other Tyrells, Littlefinger, Peter Baelish. Does Ser Dantos even know anything beyond the fact that they're going to, quote unquote, rescue Sansa rather, and whisk her away? Does he know? You could see him. He seems like a pretty gentle dude. Like, does he even know about the murder plot? Initially, I'm not sure, but I love the fact that there's some sort of conspiracy going on. And then, we find out a lot of things when Littlefinger steals away Sansa to the Vale. And we find out that I love the Lysa character. I love the Aunt Lysa character, because she really is one sandwich short of a picnic. She's completely crazy. You could see why her son is it Robin the Weak or Robin the Coward? I forget what they call him.
Yeah, I don't know.
Towards the end of it.
I'll look.
But I love the fact that you could see that sick, she's breastfeeding her son, her prepubescent adolescent son. And there's a sickness there. There's a real creepiness to the Eyrie, to the Vale for me. It's really beautiful, but it's really empty. It seems very cold. No pun intended, but it's a very eerie place for me. Every time we end up there, I'm like, wow, this place really gives me the creeps. And I think Lysa's at the center of that. And then we find out that she was the one who killed John Arryn. She poisoned her husband, who was Robert and Ned's mentor. It wasn't some murder conspiracy. She did it in order to pursue a relationship with Peter Baelish, with Littlefinger. So we find out all this crazy stuff. And once again, Sansa is mixed up in all of this shit that she doesn't need. And it's true what you say about Baelish. He's one of the last characters where you're really wondering, is he friend or foe? And where his alliances are. Because even by the end of this season, we know Varys is on the up and up. And we questioned him for a while. He even sits on trial against Tyrion. If we find out that's a part of the plot to help Tyrion. But with Littlefinger into season 4, you're like, what is this guy's game? And you're so worried for Sansa because of all she's already been through. And this guy is still needling her and sort of bringing her along and leading her on and all these crazy things. So that arc was really very interesting for me. And then, of course, just straight up, murders Lysa, just throws her through the moon door. And it's like, whoa, that's crazy. Right after she's talking about bodies breaking on the rocks below. Right. Seconds after she's being tossed out of that skylight, whatever it is, floor light.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's super cool. I love that. All right. Let me think here. Is there anything else to say about Sansa? I don't think I have anything to say about her right now. I want to move on instead to Ramsay Bolton.
Oh.
Ramsay Snow. Mac Daddy X4 wrote in and said, hi guys. Is Ramsay the closest we've had to a truly evil character so far, or do you think he's just acting out for Daddy's attention? The man has shown no mercy or redeeming qualities up to this point. Other characters have performed evil acts in the name of God's, Lord's gold and duty, but Ramsay truly gets off on torturing and killing entire towns of people needlessly. At least Joffrey's issues, rest in peace, can be blamed on his crazy incest brain.
Yeah, but you can't make that excuse, because look at Marcella and look at Tommen.
Yeah, they're fine. I agree with that.
Right?
Yeah, I totally agree.
It would be one scapegoat you could kind of allude to, but I don't think so.
So to Mac Daddy X4's inquiry, what do you make of the arc with Ramsay? It's so interesting because I don't understand. And I'm sure there's more texture in the book, but I just don't understand the intent. Like, why are you doing this? And I guess it really was his intention always to break this guy, to use him in this way. I don't know. I don't. Is he that smart? I don't. Or is he just sociopathic? He obviously has this desire to, he's a bastard, so to receive the proper name and fly the banner in a meaningful way and all that. And he ends up getting that through his work. But I am curious what you make about Ramsay Snow / Bolton. And like, you have the shaving scene, which is interesting. And
dude.
Obviously the chase scene with the dogs, which is interesting, and, just totally broken him. What do you make of Ramsay this season?
Yeah, I mean, Ramsay, you think of all the wicked characters in the show, Cersei, Tywin. With Cersei and Tywin, they're capable of enormous atrocities. Look at the Red Wedding, or just everything Cersei's done. But you know that the reasoning behind everything they do, all their maneuvering, is the family at the center of that, promoting the Lannisters and all of that. With Joffrey, he is maybe the worst because he's got this evil nature, but he's really a coward, which we know. Ramsay is interesting because he's a lot like Joffrey in so far as that capacity for evil, but he's got the courage, the conviction, the muscle, and the skill, which makes him very dangerous. You know what I mean? And I think what's making him operate, I think you have a great point here, Kyle. I think at the center of that is him, his bastard status, and wanting to please his father, which is a theme that runs, I think, throughout the veins of this show for a lot of characters. But Roose Bolton is at the center of this, Ramsay's dad. And I think what makes Ramsay so scary is the fact that he has the means and the willingness to do this all himself. He is sickeningly evil, but he also, like when what's her name, Yara, comes to rescue Theon, Ramsay's right there on the front line fighting her and her host off. You know what I mean? He's a dangerous person because he's not afraid to step up and sort of back up. He, again, that conviction, although evil, it makes him really a frightening character. And it's an interesting point of what you say about him pulling the puppet strings for Theon. Was that a plan all along? We know he's a psychopath. Was it just slowly unfurling that he figured out that he was going to do that? Is there some sort of criminal genius at the center of it, which makes him even more horrifying? I'm not sure. But, shout out to that character because it's really played well. And even now on multiple viewings and repeated watchings, he's not one of my favorites because I think he really does make me uneasy. You really, and he'll continue to do that until, finally he doesn't anymore. But, and that's in future seasons. But I think it is a good job and it is a good character. And that shaving scene where he's demonstrating to his dad that he's got this guy, Theon's a zombie and I've got him eating out of my hand. Check this out. I'm going to basically belittle the shit out of him while he's shaving me with a straight razor. It's pretty brilliant writing. Now, I don't know if that was in the book. I'm sure it must be. But that's just a brilliant way to demonstrate just the way, just not only the evil, but the manipulation. And we already knew Theon was sort of weak-willed, or he has that bipolar nature where he doesn't know where his alliances lie anyway. So he was just easy pickings for Ramsay. And it is an interesting point if this was intentional all along or this just kind of played out for Ramsay in a beneficial way for him. I don't know.
I'm glad you brought up too, the interesting scene of Yara coming to save him, and he's just not up to this. He actually gets a lot of them killed, like, because he stays behind and he refuses to move quickly, and obviously he's totally brainwashed and poisoned and all of this. But it's pretty heartbreaking when she's like leaving and she's like, he's not, my brother is dead or whatever.
He's dead.
So that's that. But it is interesting, and the acting is very good. I am curious, again, as usual, please don't write in because I don't want it spoiled for me, but I am curious about the texture shown from the books, because I think that there's probably more there that I would like to know. But
yeah, you would think it's more fleshed out.
Indeed.
All
right. Caleb Bryant wrote in said, Sandor Collin and the Red Viper Dagon. How
Yes.
did you guys feel about Arya and the Hound's father-daughter dynamic in this season? I love the way they both teach and learn from each other in what feels like an integral chapter for both of their arcs. I always consider season 4 to be the peak of Thrones for me, for Arya and the Hound, and of course the introduction and conclusion of my favorite character, Oberyn.
Yes.
And so he says, thanks for all the laughs and for your authenticity. Thank you, Caleb, for writing in.
Oh, thanks. Very sweet.
So what did you make of Arya and the Hound, culminating in what appears to be his death? He's left for dead. There is something interesting about watching them come together. It's uneasy alliance.
Yes.
Arya continues to tell him that she's going to kill him. You almost kind of feel bad for him a little bit, which is interesting. I always love when stories tug on your heartstrings a little bit with the characters that you really have no right or interest in understanding to that extent, to maybe sympathize with them a little bit. The scene with the fire when he gets bit when they're at the abandoned farmstead or whatever, and he realizes that there's a bounty out on his head and just idiots are attacking him. It's actually pretty funny, but he is scared shitless of the fire and explains what happened and how his father lied about what happened. So he's never really even had any true justice. And there's a lot to this character. I like this character a lot, and got to give a shout out to Micah because she loves this character too. What do you make of Arya and the Hound in this story so far?
Yeah, it's a major part of this season, Arya and the Hound and their journey. And, you know, it got me thinking a lot about this character with the Hound, with Sandor, because once he left King's Landing and sort of swore off his alliance to Joffrey, and he left at the Battle of the Blackwater, right? He's really out to survive now. He's all about survival. So at first, you have him escorting Arya in order to get the bounty off her when he was going to the bridge to bring her to the Freys. When he ends up they're going, their last resort is to go to the Eyrie and bring Arya to her Aunt Lysa, and that doesn't work out. But through this all, there's this very contentious relationship, obviously this animosity, and it's less father-daughter. But over the course of season 4, there is this thawing, and it becomes this prisoner, this sort of warden-prisoner relationship kind of becomes this mentor-protege relationship. And he teaches Arya how to, how to kill, how to fight, how to think, how to survive. And there's this thawing until they come across Brienne. And now you mentioned it very early in the episode, Kyle, in our discussion before, how this show does this wonderfully. You'll get characters now meeting for the first time, and this has happened and will continue to happen. Now you have Brienne and the Hound sharing a scene, and they're at odds for what they want for the Stark kids. And this fight, first of all, that fight between Lady Brienne and the Hound is one of my favorite moments of season 4. It is so brutal. And you have this really wonderful sort of conflict between pretty evenly matched, I would say, powers, and the way it goes down. And Brienne, of course, gets the upper hand. And you find out that, at the end, when Arya leaves the Hound for dead, he's got a broken leg. He's got some compound fracture. He can't move. And he's in the middle of that, on that mountainside, the hill. And she leaves him. She doesn't put him out of his misery like he begs. She just kind of leaves him there. Arya just kind of leaves him there for dead. And, the Hound did torture her a lot. He really picked on her. He really sort of gave her a hard time. So that was a moment where I remember thinking for the first time, how is this going to play out? Is she going to help him? We don't want to lose the Hound because he's such a great character. And of course, he's got that Achilles heel with the fire. He's a very interesting character, and you want to see how it's going to play out for him, especially now because he's not operating under a lord. He's kind of out on his own. So there is some sympathy there. He does that farmer and his daughter takes them in, and he ends up mugging the guy. And you realize he's not a bad guy, the Hound. He's got to survive. He's doing whatever it takes to survive. And Arya is inherently good, so she's taking exception to the things that he's doing. But at the same time, he's kind of teaching her, it's not all about being good. You got to be pragmatic if you want to survive. Like he says to her, how many Starks have to lose their head for you to realize this is how you survive? So it's really great, very interesting, and sort of our road game in this season too, where they're journeying from place to place, where a lot of characters are more static, whether they're at the wall or they're saddled up in King's Landing or they're somewhere else. They're moving from place to place. So that's a really that kinetic sort of thing where, there's sort of this road team, which I enjoyed. I was sorry to kind of see that come to an end, as much as I loved seeing Brienne meet the Hound. I mean, those are the kind of payoff moments. Now, this show doesn't give you a lot as far as what we talked about, satisfying things. It's not going to pull punches. You're going to lose characters that you love, but you will see characters crossing paths. And I love how they do that, because it just adds so much more dimension when two characters come together. Then you have this whole other dimension to both of their characters, and it kind of builds. So cool. I don't know any other show that does it like this. And maybe it's the sheer amount of characters.
There are a lot of characters. It must be very difficult to
so many
keep track of from a creative standpoint. I like too that I think it's Brienne that alerts them to the fact that like the political situation has totally changed, because I think that when they meet, I'm pretty sure Brienne's the one that says like the king's dead, like all this crazy, and I think they both look at each other like, oh, like
they don't even know.
Right, and there's exceedingly few places for them to even go. That's what's so funny about the situation with these two, is that with Arya and the Hound, is that the Hound is just running out of options. Like, he was originally doing it out of pure greed, and now, like you said, he is just trying to survive and kind of keeping his collateral. But they have an uneasy alliance. He lets him keep her, lets her keep her sword. She has a horse and all the rest. So it is fun to watch them evolve, and you almost want Arya to pay it back with some good spirit in this, but she's consistent, at least, that she wants this guy dead. I mean, you remember when he was fighting the Brotherhood and she was like screaming for them to kill him, and so can't blame her either. She's been through the ringer well.
The ringer.
And I'm glad you brought up Brienne, because I wanted to just mention briefly, I really enjoy the combination of her and Podrick, because I just feel like that Podrick character is awesome, and for some reason he's a great compliment to both Tyrion and later to Brienne. What do you make of their combination and his like kind of insistence on going with her? He doesn't know how to ride a horse. He doesn't know how to cook. He doesn't know how to really do anything. It's funny, but very endearing, and he sticks with it. But it's also out of survival for him, because he knows that he's going to be in serious trouble if anyone finds him as Tyrion's squire. I mean, his days are numbered.
Yeah, I love Podrick because he's so loyal, and he really does serve Tyrion so well. That's a really tearjerker moment for me when they're saying, Tyrion and Podrick are saying their goodbyes in Tyrion's cell. And Tyrion dispatches him. He says, look, once they get their wherewithal, they get their druthers, and they realize we're associated, you're dead. So you need to get out of here now. So Bronn and Jaime and Tyrion sort of orchestrate this thing for Brienne to go off with Podrick as her squire. And, she's reluctant too, because she's kind of used to being this lone wolf. And I love the dynamic of Podrick wanting to serve and being sort of very willing and very loyal and hardworking. But once they get out there on the road, you realize he's been in the service of Tyrion for too long. Really what he does is hang out and spend time, keeps Tyrion company, drinks with him.
Right.
He doesn't do a lot. So when he gets out, he can't ride, he can't fight, he doesn't know how to do anything. And then and then he's drinking in the inn. And
he's like,
don't get drunk.
He's like slamming it. Funny.
Because he's used to a certain way of living. He's used to being Tyrion's, aide. And now he's got to be a straight up squire. But I love that he has such a lovable quality. Not only is he noble, and we see how brave he is when he saves Tyrion at the Blackwater from that murderous Lannister guard, but he's also got that sort of spirit that he wants to do well. And he's just inherently good. He's just a fun character and sort of the rapport that he develops with Brienne, and the fact that he's fucking up. He doesn't even keep an eye on Arya, so she gets kind of lost in the whole thing with when Brienne's fighting the Hound and all that. So, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And again, it's like one of those things where I wouldn't have ever seen this coming a couple of seasons ago, where Podrick and Brienne were going to go out together. But it used to be Brienne and Jaime. Now it's Podrick. It's so fun, and I love the fact that the characters sort of branch out and form relationships with other existing characters. Again, it just makes it brings out the character more when you see them set against more characters. Super fun.
Before we move to the Wall and north of the Wall and then across the Narrow Sea as well, we must touch on one more character more deeply, and The champ wrote in about this. It says, "Am I the only one disappointed that we never got to see Jaime at full power? We hear all this talk about how Jaime is the greatest swordsman in all the lands, but we only see Jaime fight Ned in season 1, a poorly choreographed fight, if I might add. Everything else Jaime did was done off screen. In season 3, he fought Brienne, but he was in a cage for over a year and out of practice. I wish we got a flashback or something just to show how badass Jaime is as a warrior. If Jaime was at full power, do you think he would have fought the Mountain?" Maybe, but I wonder, and thank you for writing in, the champ. I think what's interesting about this character, and we had said it in the last episode as well, is that you don't see a lot of what he's all about. You don't see his year plus or more, I think, in captivity. And probably most interestingly, and I brought this up in the past, is that probably one of the most important scenes in the mythos of the show is the scene when the king is killed by Jaime, and so many people are there and present for it. You hear about it constantly, but never see it, which is cool. But I wonder what you make of him here and how we never really get to see him at full power. We kind of see him more feeble. I think it's a nice contrast between the expectations of who Jaime is and the extent of what he's capable of, especially as we talked about with Bronn, kind of trying to train him and him being at a massive deficit with his left hand. So what do you make about Jaime here?
Yeah, one of the biggest tragedies that plays out from being this despicable character in season 1 that you really hate to realizing, at the center of this character, it's like, what does a character become when they lose the thing that they were identified with? He's this legendary warrior, one of the greatest in Westeros. And I think on one hand, I agree. It would have been cool to see a little more of Jaime in action. But what's really important at the middle of everything is that the fact of everything he was known for, everything that he was associated with or that he identified himself as was lost when his hand was cut off. And not only that, but he's aging. He's 40 years old in this season. And it is interesting that the one fight that you get to see against, a proper rival in Ned Stark, one of the Lannister soldiers interferes. So you don't even in that fight, you don't get a proper sense of what Jaime's capable of because, somebody barges in. But he's such a tragic character because you're wondering how he's going to, where does Jaime go from here? He has no hand. He's reluctant at first, but willing to train under Bronn, try to use his left hand. Doesn't work out. And you're wondering, you really feel sympathy for him. Where does he go from here? But you know what, Kyle? In this season, and Jaime, he inherits this Valyrian steel sword from his dad. He gives it to Brienne. There's this love and this friendship and this respect with Brienne. And a lot of Jaime is good in this season, but he does a really despicable thing in season 4. He basically rapes Cersei.
Yeah.
On top of his dead son's funeral pyre. It's fucked. You know what I mean? So it's so weird because you could look at from A to Z, from start to finish of season 4, you could be like, wow, Jaime is really turning into a good guy. He's a proper, noble, righteous dude. You could see him changing. Maybe he's more like Tyrion, where he's a little less Lannister than we initially thought. But then that happens. And you realize that his lust or infatuation or love, whatever you want to call it, for his sister is really his downfall. It's really, sort of the black spot on his soul that he seems to not be able to escape from. And we'll see more of that in beyond season 4. But that's what's so interesting to Jaime. It's for me about Jaime, where he wants to stay in the Kingsguard. He doesn't want to have a family. Tywin wants him to go to Casterly Rock, take on a proper wife. Tywin wants Jaime to continue his lineage. And Jaime just wants to stay on as a Kingsguard, which is they basically take the life of, I don't know what you would call it, like a priest in some ways, where their duty is to serve the king and to serve the realm. So and the only thing that kind of has Jaime tempted away from that is to save Tyrion. So really it's just his love for Tyrion and his, I would say, hang up with Cersei. That's really at the center of his personality now, because the swordsman thing, doesn't mean anything anymore.
He says while he's raping her, "You're a hateful woman."
It's an unbelievable scene.
I'm glad you brought up Casterly Rock, because do we ever see it?
I don't think so.
which is
now maybe in the future.
I don't really, up to this point, yet. We don't actually, they don't never go there, which is nice restraint. I mean, I'm sure it's cheaper and easier for them not to, but I think that's also a creative decision at some point, because money is, by the second and third season of the show, money and production assets are of no issue for HBO.
Exactly.
The show is everything. So I think that's a decision. And I don't know if that's shared in the book or not, or if they just constantly refer to it. It would be cool to see it. I kind of visualize it. It's nice because it's one of the few things that I visualize where I'm like, I think it looks like this, but who the hell really knows? Because they haven't ruined it on HBO for me yet. I don't remember if it's in the future. I think it might be, but I have no clue. All right, Dig, let's go to the north and go to the wall, beyond the wall, at the wall, Castle Black. We have about 100 Night's Watchmen guarding the boundary between the wildlings and more civilized humanity. In fact, I forgot about this, but I kind of dug it. Like, all of season 9 is dedicated just to the fight at the wall. I don't think it ever leaves, which implanted in my mind this idea that maybe this could have been delivered like this more, which would have been cool. Like having entire episodes that are just about one piece of the arc.
Yeah.
And move on like that might have been a little less confusing, but I know why they did it here. There's a lot to get through at the wall when you're watching it. The king of the north, or the king of the wildlings, Mance Rayder, promises a fire, and the fire comes. It's lit in the forest outside north of the wall, and they attack. Some really cool stuff here. And watching the preparations at the wall are cool too. The different windows, the scythe, the oil that they drop, the different archery and all of this. I love seeing just a few of the giants. One's riding a mammoth, which is cool. They hitch it to the door and try to use that. They light them all on fire. Then they use like some sort of ballista to kill one of the giants. The other giant freaks out. You find out that the giant that freaks out and kills a few of the humans in the tunnel was like the king of the giants. So a lot of really interesting stuff. And of course, it all is capped off ultimately by Stannis coming and basically cutting down the wildlings. So what do you make of everything that's going on north of the wall, including going back to Craster's Keep and kind of killing the turncoats and all the rest? There's a lot going on up there, a lot to say. What do you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, it's big in this season. And, you know, at the root of things is the fact that this unified group, huge horde of wildlings, they need to have access to the south of the wall for the coming danger, to escape, you know, these zombies. And they know it, and they have to fight for that. And so you have Mance Rayder and his 9 unified tribes, this giant posse, including, we meet the Thens for the first time, which are like a cannibalistic horde of wildlings. You get all these really interesting sort of primitive characters that are, you know, they need to, this sort of attack on the wall is necessary for them. And Jon Snow, of course, is at the middle of it. Ygritte, Tormund Giantsbane, you have all these great characters. I love the fact of you have this huge set piece battle that I saw somebody, whether the showrunners or I saw George R.R. Martin talk about this, where we talk about Battle of the Blackwater. That was a pretty cool battle, but they wanted to have this giant set piece battle akin to Lord of the Rings, Battle of the Five Armies. Huge, a lot of stuff going on, really kind of a reveal of what each side is capable of. And you get that with the giants, with the mammoths, with the vast amount of warriors. And then, of course, with the Night's Watch and the Brotherhood, you get their sort of war infrastructure with the barrels and with that giant sort of pendulum anchor that comes down and scrapes the wall of climbers.
It's super cool.
Crazy shit. It's big. The scope of it is so big. It feels like nothing we have seen so far from Game of Thrones, which is really cool. But what I love at the end of that battle, with so many sort of casualties on each side, that you realize the Night's Watch is down to like, the Brotherhood's down to like 50 or 60 guys. That was them sort of defending it for one night. So, you know, even at the end of that huge battle, that they really don't ultimately have a chance. And Jon Snow goes out to basically assassinate Mance Rayder. Now, it's sort of handled like a parlay. I love that scene. And shout out to Kieran Hines, who plays Mance Rayder. I think he's a wonderful actor.
Yeah,
I love that scene where they're sitting down and Jon Snow's intention is to assassinate this man. But there's something still so fair and understandable about Mance Rayder in that moment where he's angry. He where's Tormund? You killed this giant. He was the king of the giants. I lost a lot of men. But there's a fairness and an even-handedness, a very king-like, maybe more kingly than most of the kings we've seen so far, the King Beyond the Wall. And I had forgotten that Stannis and Davos ride in to basically rescue the Night's Watch. I forgot all about that. So that was a really pleasant surprise that I really completely lost track of. And to see Stannis and Melisandre and Davos at the wall at Castle Black or wherever they are was really cool. Because you weren't kind of drawing those characters up on that parallel where they're going to all of a sudden end up in the north. So that was a really neat surprise. And it does make sense because that was the only way the wall wasn't going to be overtaken by the 100,000 wildlings and Mance Rayder. But I really was reminded how much I love the Mance Rayder character because you could really understand things from his perspective and from the wildling perspective with this impending danger that's coming for everybody. We talked about this in season 3. They're the ones on the front lines of that realized it before anybody else realized
right.
it.
And they
so
just
that sense of urgency is paramount.
Well, I think, I don't know. Again, I don't know what happens in the book, but Mance is in the 9th episode for the first time really talks about how like they don't really want violence necessarily. Like they just want to be on the other side of the wall. And that the wall's construction those many hundreds or thousands of years ago has just kind of arbitrarily isolated them nearer to the danger. And like all they want to do is get through. But it's not that simple, of course, because they're going to take up a ton of space and they have to eat and they're representing.
Some of them eat people.
Right, exactly. There's all these different there's all these different races as well.
Right.
But also, in fact, I love that scene where the cowardly ex-commander of the guards in King's Landing is like still stammering and saying like giants don't exist. He's like, that's a giant riding a mammoth.
Slint.
Hate indeed.
That dude.
Yeah, he sucks. Great. It's so interesting how he kind of like hangs around like that character.
Yeah.
Hangs around for a while,
because Tyrion banishes him to the wall. Then all of a sudden he's like on the whatever. He's a lord of the wall. It's like, oh man,
Yeah, indeed. He kind of just like falls in with the leadership there. But yeah, you can't really blame Mance for wanting that. But it's important to remember too that I believe that like the army is 100,000 strong, but that's not all of them. I mean, it's just the people that are fighting in the army. They're representing a lot more. So to let them in, let's say they're representing hundreds of thousands of people all told. Their women fight, but their children and their elderly and whatever. It's a lot to ask, but it's not a huge surprise nonetheless to be asked that. I mean, what else do you want them to do? They know that they can't fight and win. And so I enjoy that as well. And yeah, seeing Stannis come in, I had totally forgotten about that. In fact, when like you see the horses and it's kind of hard to identify their flags in the first shots, I'm like, who the fuck is that? I don't remember this. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Stannis and Sir Davos. And again, as you said, and as we noted earlier, seeing just the different combinations of characters. Now Jon Snow with Melisandre and like all this. It's cool. And I often wonder with shows that last this long, how, like I've wondered that with Battlestar Galactica and others where it's like characters kind of just stick with each other. You think about in Battlestar Galactica number 6 and Gaius, like they're just always together for seasons. They're just together. Is it a relief to get away from that person, or is it difficult because you get so used to working with that one person and working off that person, and they're kind of like shaking it up finally? So it's pretty exciting from that perspective, just as the script takes its course. I now want to go across the Narrow Sea, go to Braavos and all these other locations. I'm curious, first of all, what you make of the introduction of the Iron Bank, which is probably one of my favorite parts of the story, although they just touch on it briefly. They obviously reject Stannis, at least at first. But this idea that is touched on in the 3rd season as well, when Tywin is talking about their money situation, and it actually might be in this season. No, in fact, I think it's in this season when he tells Cersei that like our gold store, like our mines haven't even produced gold in 3 years. Like were basically broke. I found that fascinating because they're basically creating their own currency. It explains a lot about how they are so rich. It's because they are literally mining the money and digging it out of the ground. So that's obviously a huge advantage to them. But I love this idea of these people that do not give a fuck. They really don't. And I like how they make it seem like they play up this idea that they're just faces, like it's just a group of people and then another group of people and so on and so forth. And Stannis goes to the Iron Bank and they make him wait for hours and they reject him and they just say no and they don't care. I like this idea of there being a higher power. This is like I would love to know more about this, and we do, but I'd love to know even more about the Iron Bank. It reminds me of my story that I made up for Star Wars when we did how we would have written a Star Wars sequel.
I love that one.
And thank you. And I have this idea of like having a corporation involved and like what that looks like, corporate might and money, just that angle. And this brings in that angle, like that even in this fictional old world, the be all end all is money, and they are totally affixed only to that and only to what will pay them back their investments. So what do you make of the Iron Bank?
Yeah, man. I mean, what is going on with Braavos? I'm so interested in Braavos. I always want to know more. You have the House of Black and White, the Faceless Men, the water dancing, the dancing masters, the swordsman's ship, the Iron Bank. There's so many crazy things. Why isn't this like King's Landing? That's what I keep asking myself. Why isn't this the center of everything? Sort of that everything rotates around. But the Iron Bank was handled really cool because, again, they leave Stannis and Davos waiting. When they finally do come out, they're very unassuming. They're not fancily dressed or of great stature. There's no pageantry there because the power is the money. They don't need to act like that. In fact, they're very unassuming looking dudes that come out. And the guy that Davos and Stannis are having the exchange with doesn't have a care in the world. He's that there's a root to that power and the money. And what you said, it's not about King's Landing or the Ironborn or Dorne or, the North. It's ExxonMobil, right? It's like, It's the corporation. It's the
Bank of America.
It's the money that rules everything.
Yeah.
And that's the head of the food chain. That's the top of the food chain over there. And it was interesting to see that and get a little glimpse of that world. And then, of course, that sets the wheels in motion for Davos to get Salador Saan, hire his fleet back, and actually build an army so they could go to rescue the Wall and the Night's Watch and the Brotherhood. So that was a really interesting chain of events. But I love seeing, and again, the season ends with Arya heading to Braavos 2. She gives a sailor the coin, and she's sort of revered and saying, yeah, of course. Like,
there's like a mystique. Like they're like, it's cool. Like they all somehow know.
So cool.
Yeah, it's neat.
I need to know more about Braavos. So I hope we do. I don't remember where it goes from here. I do remember a couple of characters later in the run of seasons heading to Braavos again, but I hope we learn more about it because it's very interesting.
People have written in about this. I think this is true, that there's like a shit ton of exterior stuff written about Game of Thrones that is all about all of this stuff, that I think is part of the reason why the new books haven't been written, is because he kind of got George Martin. I don't know if he was writing or just approving, just kind of getting obsessed with like the encyclopedic stuff and like getting all the official stuff. And of course he was making hand over fist money and all the rest.
That doesn't hurt.
But it's my hope is that if I do relent and finally read the books I'm trying, that maybe I'll be able to, because I don't want to go into those books first. I feel like that's poserish and stupid. Like you really got to read the core material first. That would be like reading the Silmarillion or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Silmarillion, I can never say it without having read The Lord of the Rings. So I'm trying, but I know that stuff's out there and it really adds all that stuff. And it makes me excited to put, although a little daunting, to put in the legwork to like earn that, as it were.
Yeah, but it's nice to know the world building is there.
Indeed.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's stay over there finally and talk, and there's other things we can talk about if you'd like, but the last big thing we need to talk about, of course, is what's going on with Khaleesi Daenerys as she becomes the breaker of chains more and more, and she's freeing all of the slaves, and I like some of this stuff. That there's a few things that worth touching on, I think, and I'll throw it over to you. But one is just kind of the betrayal she experiences near the end, and the betrayal that I think the audience kind of feels on her behalf. because you don't really see it coming. And of course, I also dig this entire angle of the complexity of freeing slaves. I think that it's interesting that they get into that, about how some people want to go back to being slaves, and some of the slave masters want their rights back and their funeral rights and all of these kinds of things, and kind of how she's trying to balance this idea that maybe she needs to seriously reinforce her foundation as a ruler in this other foreign land before she gets any further, because she's so eager to cross and do all these things and take back her throne. But she's becoming, instead, being more comfortable being the queen of this foreign land, and this having these old sellswords that now follow her in two different groups, and these ex-slaves. It's really interesting, but at the same time, it's frustrating because it seems so unimportant right now to what is going on in the main story, but it obviously isn't. And then there is a couple other things worth noting too. I thought that the scene with her dragons getting blocked away was sad in some weird way. I don't know why it's sad, because they're fucking dragons. And I dig the love kind of brewing between Grey Worm and her translator, which I think is cute to watch as well. So talk to me a little bit about how you feeling about what's going on with Daenerys. I mean, anything you want.
Yeah, Grey Worm is so badass that he could still feel, even though he's an Unsullied, he could still, like, that's the very definition of power. He might be the most powerful person in Westeros and Essos, which is amazing. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. This might be my favorite bit for Daenerys, because, she commands this massive army of Unsullied, right? She's got wonderful commanders, some of the best fighters in the land, and Ser Jorah and Grey Worm and Barristan and Daario and the Second Sons. Seems like she's got all her ducks in a row and that everything should go swimmingly, but now she's got to deal with all the political repercussions of her slave liberation tour of Slaver's Bay, and everything that's, like what you said, like there's some of these slaves 60, 70, 80 years old. This infrastructure, the way they live their lives in this part of the land, this is all they knew. This was, even though it's not sort of by Westeros or by Western standards in this world, it's not proper or the way it should go. There was comfort in that. So now she's dealing with that. And I love the realism of these dragons sort of being a little bit uncontrollable as they get older. They're murdering livestock, they're murdering children. It's a little more realistic than, this Rydia in Final Fantasy, where she could just call on animals and they do her bidding. Like, they're wild creatures. Jorah warns her of that. I don't know if that was early this season or late last season, but where they're still dragons and you're the mother of dragons, but this might be kind of tough going as they get older to control these wild beasts. I love the realism of that, where one's sort of off on its own. They don't even know where it is. And the other two have to be locked up before they murder any more people or, take any more money from these poor people and livestock. So I like the fact that she's dealing with all these political repercussions and actually having to not just be a liberator now, but actually be a ruler. And she says, well, I'll rule. And it's hard. She's seeing lines of people. They all have their problems. I love that one thing where I guess she comes into the last slaver city. I guess it's Marine, where they kind of try to warn Daenerys away by having the crucified kids.
Right.
For 160 miles every mile, like as mile markers or whatever. And the way that just adds fuel to her fire. She's like, oh, fuck that.
And they send out the champion who's
yes. Yeah. So that's a great Daario moment. By the way, very confusing because Dario's a new actor in this.
Yeah, season. I don't know. It's funny because Micah looked into that because she's like, I didn't realize that either. I'm like, and apparently like the actor himself doesn't know why he wasn't brought back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like
the original guy.
Yeah, that's what he says. I don't.
I heard he was a rapper as well. That original guy. This new guy, I remember being very confused by it, and actually probably stupidly thinking this was another character or something. And what happened to the other guy? Not realizing it was the same guy. But this new Daario, he's great, but he looks like Shia LaBeouf to me. I cannot look at him and not think of Shia LaBeouf. So, but yeah, I thought this was a great one for probably my favorite of Daenerys and Jorah. And then, of course, the tragedy, Kyle, I was thinking of you because Jorah gets found out from Ser Barristan and then from Daenerys that he was spying for the Baratheons. And I was really thinking about you because I know you're your love for Jorah Mormont. But I was thinking, like, I was kind of frustrated because I was thinking, how else could he have handled it? Why didn't he come clean before he was found out? Because by the time he was found out, he was on the up and up. He kind of corrected his wily ways and he was on the straight and narrow. He wasn't betraying her anymore. But I would imagine maybe it would have went better if he said, look, you know, I was kind of like spying for the Baratheons, and once I got to know you, I thought better of it, you know, that type of thing. But he's dispatched. You know, she's like, get out of here by nightfall, or you're fucked. You know, I'll kill you. And so you feel so bad for Jorah in that moment. It's like, oh man, but he was good now. Yes, he was a shady character in the beginning, but he's good now. So I wish it could. I do wish he could have handled it differently. It's not the last we'll see of Jorah. I will say that. But and it's very interesting how that plays out. But I do feel like she's down a commander. You know, she's down to Barristan, Grey Worm, and Daario now.
Indeed. And it leaves us in a interesting spot as far as the viewer is concerned, because we have a few things in motion right now. Of course, the Barristan thing is interesting just because there's such tension between those two characters. That's kind of relieved, like steam there. Not in the way you might want it to go, although I don't mind either character. But we have, as we noted, Brienne versus the Hound, and Arya's on the run, and Tywin kills Tyrion, and Varys helps him escape, and Arya presents the coin to get to Braavos, and there's just a lot kind of hanging out. I'm curious if there's anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about.
You know, there was one, and Game of Thrones does this sometimes. We talked about a little bit about the Turncloaks with the host of the Brotherhood that kind of holds up at Craster's and betrays the Night's Watch and everything like that. And you get that one character of Carl, the dagger guy, right? Who, and we didn't talk about Jon Snow, so this is a good opportunity to talk about Jon Snow in this season a little bit more.
Sure.
But Jon Snow is almost killed by this dude. And this guy's basically a cutthroat from like Flea Bottom or something. And he's just in charge of Craster's sort of whatever, you know, host of, you know, these turncoats that Jon Snow takes a small group, Locke and some other guys, to basically liberate this place. And Jon Snow's this, you know, he's one of our primary characters. He might be the main character in the show. And he's almost killed by this cutthroat if this girl didn't just interfere. And I thought that was really interesting because it makes me realize, like, oh shit, like it adds to the realism of the show. In other words, does that work the same way for you, where it's like it's not this lordly, it's not Jon Snow fighting, you know, some other, the equivalent of Jon Snow on the opposing side. It's like some guy you would never expect to get the upper hand of Jon Snow, and he almost kills him. Yeah. So that was another thing where it's like a reminder of this show where it's like, wow, anything could really happen. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, there's a few other things I liked seeing the Lord Commander fighting because he's such an asshole, but he obviously can.
Oh my God, yeah, Alistair, right? And he's injured now. He's survived.
I think he survived, but I like how he's like, again, to your point, like they're getting in it. Like there's not a lot of cowards really. Like they do back it up when the time comes, which is cool. I wanted to ask you about this idea of duels, like the trial by combat. What do you think of that idea? It's so strange because this idea that like you might have done something you might not have, but it's a way of referring to the God's will, basically, by seeing who wins and who loses in that regard.
That's a great way to put it.
Arena, and I think they actually explicitly say that.
Okay, that makes sense to explain it that way, or else it would just seem like just an excuse for entertainment,
right?
Which is also very King's Landing and very Lannister, but you know, very cruel Roman Colosseum type of entertainment, bloodthirsty entertainment, but does seem like an excuse of like, yeah, let's have a battle and a party and we'll watch these guys kill each other, you know, type of a thing. Yeah, it's interesting. I like that it's a thing. I like that they didn't just do it once, that this is a thing in this place, that, you know, that could be, if you have somebody brave enough and talented enough to fight for you, then you could be innocent.
Right. It's very funny. And I wonder, I don't think trial by combat should be a thing in society, but how do you feel about the idea of dueling? That's becoming a thing that people, you know, just on the fringes, people talk about sometimes, like why isn't it legal to say like, we're going to go and meet in this place and try to kill each other. I mean, if that's
Right.
if that's what two people want to do and they can sign off, like, why is that necessarily not legal? I'm kind of on the fence on that. I wonder what you think.
Can it be like the Beat It video where the two guys have to hold hands and then knife each other?
Right.
Was that a real thing? Like a 50s street gang? Like, all right, you with arm's length, like you have to keep your hands locked, and then you have your switchblade.
I think it's just because it looked cool.
That was it was a good dance choreography.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be weird.
The idea of a duel kind of terrifies me because I always think about this when I think about ninja films or samurai. I guess this would apply to like Wild West type things. If you're living your life like that, let's say you're a Ronin in medieval Japan or something, you have to, let's say you're a badass swordsman. There's every possibility you're going to run up against somebody even better than you. So if you're living in that type of world, do you do anything except train? Because you want to survive. In other words, like, it would be great for me to go out to the bar with my friends and have a drink, but that would probably rob me of training for 4 hours. And I don't want to get killed in a duel because I know that's my life. Like, I could meet up in a duel or a contest with another swordsman or something. We meet on a bridge. I have to cross this way. He has to cross that way. We're locking swords. So it makes me very nervous to think like living in a world where that would be if you want to survive and you're not suicidal, then you would have to put all of your time and energy into mastering a craft, and there still would be people better than you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think about this a lot. It really speaks to my crazy brain.
Yeah, but I can
in
see
this world, it would be, if there's a mountain waiting for you, like, I don't know. Do you just say, I hope the guy I run into, I'm better than, and I'll just train a medium amount instead of being like the most formidable? I don't know. It makes me nervous. I'm glad I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover, Kyle.
Isn't it? I always like to say, isn't it incredible that there was a time when the ex-secretary of the Treasury and the vice president of the United States fought a duel, and that the vice president killed the ex-secretary of the Treasury and then ran and got away?
What year was that?
1805, maybe, something like that.
All right. It's a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. It's not like we're talking about BC or something, or somewhere else in a galaxy far, far away. Long time ago.
1804. I was right.
Dude, there's something very romantic about the honor of that, like settling your disputes that way, but horrifying, because what if I just, like, what if I like inadvertently insult somebody and I really didn't mean it, or I'm joking around and they don't take it as a joke and now they want to duel with me? Like, it just makes me, I don't think I would ever talk or associate with anybody.
Yeah, because
if I was living in that kind of climate.
Because you're not compelled to do it, but you look like a bitch if you don't. And
that's the thing.
But a lot of people, so the drama around that apparently is that, and I don't know much about dueling or anything, but is that it was traditional to miss and to just say that you did it. And so Hamilton apparently shot in the air, and then he was just shot. I guess.
Wow.
While doing
after
that.
throwing his opportunity.
Right.
Wow. Then and I think you have told me that before, which is interesting because it speaks to varying levels of anger too. Like, he was so angry that he wasn't going to relent. And yeah, there's something really, again, it's a romantic notion, but yeah, like you said, and then you would have to do it because that whole thing of a coward dies a million deaths. And I do attest to that. You can't, in the moment, you can't be a coward, because
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's easier said than done, but I definitely go in for that philosophy of like, you have to just, sometimes you just got to be a man type of thing.
No, I don't want
to do that. I don't want to live like that.
I don't. I mean, I haven't since I was younger, but I've gone in where it's like you just, like you're on the spot and you gotta throw down. I mean, I've gotten the shit out of me for that, but I'm glad that I've gotten beat up, but I'm glad that I've gotten beat up as opposed to just running away. At least I tried.
Right. Can't live that down.
Another thing I wanted to touch on was this idea of, they talk about old houses and how houses come and go. I find this fascinating that houses are created. They mentioned a couple of seasons ago with Sir Davos, for instance, that he created it when we talked about it on the show, his own crest with the onion, and he is the Onion Knight or whatever. And I like this idea of houses coming and going based on their favor with the powers that be and the money they create and perhaps the investment decisions and the land they own and all this. That might be the most fascinating stuff to read about, are all the different houses and how they all kind of combine in. Are you into to the lore like that as well?
Definitely. Yeah. And who was in power when, and the long-standing nature of some houses versus ones that have come and gone. That's really interesting. Again, that world building and that sort of texture and origin, all the origin stuff that plays into Game of Thrones and how rich that is really, really kind of neat. It does make me want to learn even more. It's such a rich world, even more. I know George R.R. Martin really admired Tolkien and crafts his stuff to be that good, but I think in a lot of ways, I gotta say, man, and this may be sacrilegious, but I think he surpassed Tolkien in a lot of ways with this stuff.
I think so too.
It's more rich. There's more to it, and it's different. It's not, dwarves and elves and hobbits and that sort of thing. So it's different. So you don't have to compare them. It's a little bit of apples and oranges, although they're both high fantasy, I guess. Which makes it cool because those differences make them unique in their own right. But yeah, I think it's so good, and the fact that I just imagine how good the books are. I know we talk about the books, but I just imagine how good they are, because it's hard to capture how good the printed word is in film or television. It's just really tough. So I imagine they're better. So that's what makes it so alluring. It's like, yeah, I want to get there, to turn these pages and read more about Oberyn and Jaime and all these characters that we love, Brienne. So I definitely will. I think I'm going to wait until we're done. We got 3 more to do. No, we got 4 more to do after this. So I think I'm going to wait, because I don't want to, it's one thing to talk about the show and not be encumbered in a way by the books. Just talk about the show as the show.
Right.
And then later on, enjoy that off camera, type of thing.
Indeed. I'm the same. I feel the same. I feel like I want to kind of just maybe get through it all and then begin anew, especially because things start to split off pretty heavily. And also, I think that there are things that are happening in the show even now, as of the season we're watching, where things aren't the same in the books. So I'll be interested to kind of track that as well. Finally, before we go, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about, I just feel like we should touch on Bran just to acknowledge that he exists, but I just cannot bring myself to give a shit about that arc at all. I just can't. I know that it becomes important and whatever, but I can't help but wonder, like, if none of that was happening, what would the show be like right now? And the reality is that it would be exactly the same, except we would have gotten to see much more of what we wanted to see, or what we want to see. Are you the same? I don't care. I don't care about Bran.
Yeah, I feel bad saying it, but I do feel like you do. And I've listened to guys and girls talk on YouTube and different podcasts about how much they love this arc, not just in this season, but over the course of the entire show. And there's just something about it that is a little dull for me. You have Bran, you have Hodor, you have Jojen and Mira. Of course, we lose Jojen this season, so RIP. And I love the young sort of wizard characters. I think that's a really compelling angle. We talk about Param and Param. We talk about Raceland and Dragon's I love a wizard that's not old. I think that's really neat. But Bran and Jojen basically had the same power, so we still have Bran. So that's okay. But I think the most compelling thing is the warg thing with Bran, that he could go into the wolf, and he could go even into Hodor and control Hodor. And I think probably the most compelling bit in season 4 for me was Jojen warning Bran, like, you're doing this too much. You're warging too much. You're going to get stuck in there, and you're going to lose your humanity, which is interesting because, again, talking about the world building and how all this stuff works, knowing that you shouldn't do it for too long. Wisdom says use the wolf, but then, don't, if you're hungry, don't go eat as the wolf, because you can't sustain yourself that way, even though it feels good. So I liked learning a little bit more about how that magic, quote unquote magic, works. And then, of course, they get to the three-eyed raven. We get the children, or whatever they call themselves, which are like those foundling, original, ancient race that, you know, she was throwing like electric balls. They look like little sprites, but they were kind of normal sized. Right. The closest you would get to an elf, I guess, in Game of Thrones. So it was interesting. But yeah, for the most part, pound for pound, I agree with you, Kyle. There's something about this specific arc. It's like when it cuts away to Arya and the Hound, or Daenerys, or Jon Snow up at the wall, whatever's going on in King's Landing. It's great. And as soon as it cuts to Bran and his traveling companions, like, oh God. And, you know, there was that one heartbreaking moment too, where Bran is like kind of huddled up against a tree. Jon Snow and his guys are liberating Craster's, and he's right there. He's looking at him. It's like, oh, they're going to reunite, and they don't. They have to leave. So that was another bittersweet moment where the brothers were so close, but they don't do, they kind of tease it. They tease it out like, oh, they're going to reunite right here. And then at least Jon and Bran will be together, but it doesn't happen. Although they see, Bran sees Jon. So that was kind of a neat way that they handled that. But yeah, it's funny. I don't know why I feel bad for thinking that, because I want to enjoy it all, you know, and it's not terrible. I think it just pales in comparison to all this other wonderful stuff that's happening and all these wonderful characters. Bran is not, I don't want to criticize the acting. I think it's just the character for some reason. It's not, and it gets worse with Bran. I do remember that.
Right.
It actually gets a little worse too.
Yeah, it's just not interesting. So. He's not attached to anyone that's truly interesting. Like, we like Hodor, but we don't. I mean, Hodor is not. Yeah,
Hodor is interesting. You know? I like
he's not a character.
I like this. No, he's just kind of like this. You love Hodor, but he's just kind of a big idiot, you know, type of thing. And that's his charge, is to physically defend them. And, you know, Osha and Recon are somewhere else. So it's just the four of them, now the three of them. So yeah, not the best. Maybe it'll get better in season 5. I don't remember, but I don't think so.
Well, we'll get there shortly. Is there anything else, Dig, before we wrap it up?
No, I think we did it. I hope.
Yeah, we did the best we can. It's very it's hard. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to talk about it. It's hard to talk about this.
It is. It's hard to cover all your bases. This is the type, we always talk about this, right? Podcast stops. We say goodbye till next week. Press stop. It's like, oh shit. You know, you have those oh shit moments where it's like, I should have mentioned this. But it really is hard to cover all your bases. But I think with Game of Thrones, you're doing okay if you just really cover the characters, because it really is all about the characters, and from the characters spring the settings and the events and all that kind of stuff. But the characters, that's where it's really at with Game. So, and I'm having fun, dude. I watched this season probably a couple of times, so probably 4 times in all now. So that really, there's a lot of things to watch right now, and I just keep watching Game of Thrones. So that speaks to the power of Game of Thrones.
Right on. I agree. And we'll return back to it. And you said something controversial about this being better than Tolkien. And I agree. I mean, I don't know if it's that controversial. At least his stuff is done. I guess you can say that. And that's nice. But yeah, I don't know.
And you can't really compare until you read it on the written page, right? Because Tolkien has, I love The Hobbit. The Hobbit is like one of my comfort books. It's written with such a warmth. The trilogy as well. But in particular, The Hobbit. Now, I don't know from Adam what George R. Martin's writing style is. So I can't really compare until I compare that, you know, until I compare the pages and the books. But yeah, just pound for pound with the story and the characters and everything. Yeah, I go for Game of Thrones over Lord of the Rings right now. I'll be honest.
Well, I agree. I'm excited. We'll return to Game of Thrones in the coming weeks, of course. And you can listen to Knockback as always out of order as well. So it doesn't really matter when we post it. You'll listen to it when it goes live. Diggin', let's end every episode, or let's end this. I've done that a few times in a row, I think. Let's end this episode like we do each week with a dad joke.
I love this one, dude. I was just laughing to myself reading it again. Kyle, did you hear Bruce Springsteen changed the lyrics to one of his classic songs? What's he going to change next? His hair, his clothes, his face.
Did you write that one?
And my daughter says I shouldn't do stand-up.
I know. Did you steal that one too?
Although this is a dad joke I read off of Google.
Of course, yeah. If you could do stand-up, you got to not steal other people's jokes. You got to
do original content.
You'll be the Carlos. What's her name? Carlos Mencia.
Mencia?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. that guy was like browbeaten for still.
Yeah, but it's funny too. Like Rogan ruined that guy. I mean, before Joe Rogan even had. If people don't know the Carlos Mencia Joe Rogan saga, and you want to see some fucking early pre-YouTube cringe, go look up that shit when Rogan literally goes on stage during a Carlos Mencia. Do you remember that? Like literally, like calls him out during the show. I
have to watch this again.
Yeah, and is like, you're stealing joke, like you're totally stealing jokes, and they go back and forth and argue. Dude. It's hysterical. It's awesome. So, and
Mencia's like, he's gone. I'm not saying he had some kind of hefty defense. Like he had, like, I'm not saying it's a justified defense, but he had like an actual defense of it where he would say, like, he made a case for himself, which is really weird because you would just think it's pretty cut and dry. Like if you stole jokes, you stole jokes.
I agree.
But he sort of motored through it somehow. And I don't know if he's still considered disgraced, but you should never play. I mean, plagiarism is like, we talked about that with the whole IGN thing, right? Yep. Was that a year or two ago?
Yeah.
Right.
I did the whole interview about that as well. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like with anything like comedy, or it's just like, how hard is it to have a unique thought? That was my argument with the guy that plagiarized at IGN. I'm like, what you are doing is harder than writing a review. Like, it's comical how easy
you're gonna get caught. That's the thing. You are stealing jokes, stealing stuff off the written page, art. You're gonna get busted. It's gonna happen eventually, especially with the advent of the internet. You're not protected anymore. Like if somebody flips through a library book, like all the information's out there at our fingertips, my friends. Do not plagiarize.
No, have an original thought, for God's sake. It's not that hard. All right.
As I plagiarize every single dad joke on every single
you're full
episode.
Of shit, aren't you? Well, nonetheless, Steak, it was good to see you and good to be with everyone out there. Thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support of all things Knockback, our retro and nostalgia podcast. You can support it on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. Please continue to leave us nice reviews on iTunes and elsewhere. If you listen on free feeds, we appreciate that. You can, of course, follow us on YouTube. Some of you like to watch the video version of this, although most of you, vast majority of you, still listen. Again, I've said it before, it's so funny to watch how people consume the shows.
It is interesting.
And this show is the per capita the most audio centric of all of our shows. So that's always interesting to me. But if you like the video, come and join us and stare at us. We're handsome. So that's it. Dagan, appreciate you. Appreciate all of you out there.
Fun.
We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.